Audrey thought she was just being kind. For 3 months, she gave free blueberry pancakes to the starving, mute little girl who sat in the darkest corner of Sal's diner every single morning. She didn't know the girl was the missing daughter of the most powerful Mafia boss in Boston. She didn't know that by hiding her, she was standing between two of the most dangerous criminal empires on the East Coast. And she certainly didn't know that on a rainy Tuesday, the diner doors would get kicked open not by customers, but by 4 armed men in black suits surrounding a man whose ice-gray eyes looked like they could freeze the air itself. When he stepped forward, his Italian accent cutting through the silence like a blade, and said, "Where is my daughter?" Audrey had 2 seconds to decide. Hand over the child to a stranger who claimed to be her father, or die protecting a little girl who had no one else in this world. But what Audrey didn't see was the black sedan parked across the street. Inside, someone was watching, waiting, and the real danger hadn't even begun. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and share it with someone who loves a good thriller. Subscribe and hit the bell because the next story might just be the one you can't stop thinking about. The neon sign for Sal's diner flickered weakly, letting out a dying buzz, casting a sickly yellow glow onto the soaked sidewalk along Dorchester Avenue. 7:38 in the morning in South Boston. The kind of morning where the cold didn't just touch your skin, it seeped straight into your bones. Rain poured down like a waterfall beyond the window glass, turning the world into a dim, ashen curtain. Inside the diner, the air was so thick it felt hard to breathe. Audrey stood, planted in front of booth number 4, her hand clamped tight around a pot of hot coffee, so tight her knuckles had gone white. It was the only weapon she had. She knew how ridiculous that was. A pot of coffee against 4 guns, but she didn't move. The man who'd just walked in moved like a predator. Slowly. Confidently. Each measured step rang on the checkered tile floor like a countdown to an unavoidable disaster. He didn't need to say a word. 1 glance was enough, and 4 bodyguards fanned out on either side like machines running on a set program. 1 blocked the front door. 1 cut off the passage to the kitchen. The other 2 stayed close behind their boss, hands already at their suit coats, ready to draw a gun at any second. Lorenzo Vitale. Audrey didn't know his name, but she recognized the type. The kind of man who, the moment he walked into a room, made the whole room stop breathing. The kind whose eyes could make grown men tremble and women forget how to speak. His eyes were a steel gray, so cold they could freeze the air around him. Big Mike burst out of the kitchen with a gleaming meat cleaver in his hand. The big cook let out a threatening roar, but before he could take another step, 2 bodyguards were on him. They didn't even need their guns. 1 hard shove and Big Mike was slammed into the corner wall, the cleaver clattering to the floor with a sharp metallic ring. Mr. Jenkins, the regular who'd been sitting in the same chair since 1985, shot up in panic. He tried to stagger toward the back exit, but a bodyguard was already there, arms crossed, watching the old man with a blank stare, the way you'd watch an insect. Lorenzo stopped 3 steps from Audrey. He didn't speak right away. He just studied her from head to toe with the cold, calculating look of someone used to sizing up a threat in a heartbeat. Then he opened his mouth, his voice low and thick with Italian, cutting through the silence like a blade. "You've been feeding my daughter for 3 months now. Don't waste time lying." Audrey felt her heart hammering in her chest, but she didn't budge. She thought of the little girl hiding under the table behind her, a thin child trembling, with haunted gray eyes. The child hadn't spoken a single word in 3 months, only communicating through messy drawings on napkins. "I don't know whose child she is." Audrey heard her own voice, steadier than she'd expected. "But I know she's afraid, and anyone who makes a child that afraid, I won't hand her over." Lorenzo went still. Something flashed through those eyes, too fast for Audrey to catch what it was. Pain, anger, or something deeper, something she couldn't read. Her words had touched some wound inside this man. Silence stretched on. The tension rose so high Audrey could hear the rain tapping on the tin roof, the wall clock ticking, Big Mike's heavy breathing from the corner. One of the bodyguards lifted a hand toward the gun tucked inside his jacket, eyes on Lorenzo, waiting for the order. His finger brushed the grip. The air was tight as a string about to snap. Then a small sound came from behind Audrey, the soft rustle of fabric against wood, the tiny, ragged breath of a child. Everyone in the diner turned at the same time. From the narrow gap between the seat and the wall of booth number 4, a pair of eyes stared out. Storm gray eyes, wide and round, full of fear, and full of stubbornness too. Eyes exactly like the man standing in the middle of the diner. The little girl crawled out from under the table, slow, every movement trembling like a small animal driven into a corner. Sophia pushed herself up, her thin legs wobbling inside mud-stained sneakers gone dull with wear. She looked at Lorenzo, then at Audrey, then back at Lorenzo. In that split second, the whole room seemed to stop breathing, waiting on the choice of a 7-year-old child. And then Sophia ran, but not toward the man who claimed to be her father. She bolted for Audrey, tiny arms locking around the young woman's legs, her face pressed into an apron smeared with ketchup, her whole body shaking like a leaf caught in a storm. Lorenzo stood there as if someone had driven a blade straight through his chest. The cold mask of the most powerful mafia boss in Boston cracked in an instant. The pain in his eyes was too clear, too real, and for a heartbeat Audrey nearly believed she must be seeing it wrong. His own daughter had just chosen a stranger over her father. Audrey pulled Sophia into her arms, one hand shielding the child, the other still gripping the coffee pot. She stared straight into Lorenzo's eyes, her voice no longer unsteady, but sharp with challenge. "You see that? She's afraid of you." Lorenzo didn't answer. He stood motionless for a long time, jaw clenched tight, the muscles in his face twitching as if he were holding back some storm inside himself. Then something in him shifted, his shoulders lowered, the chill in his gaze thinned and faded, replaced by something Audrey hadn't expected at all: exhaustion, despair, and the raw pain of a father. Lorenzo signaled his bodyguards to step back. They obeyed at once, though their eyes stayed wary. Slowly he slid a hand into his suit vest pocket, moving carefully so Audrey could see he wasn't reaching for a gun. Instead, he drew out a leather wallet. From inside it, he took a photograph. The picture was old, the corners worn, as if it had been lifted and studied thousands of times. Lorenzo held it up, high enough for Audrey and Sophia to see. In it was a man a few years younger, those same gray eyes still hard but smiling, a rare, genuine smile. He was holding a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, perched in his arms. The child was grinning wide, gray eyes bright with happiness, blonde hair tied into pigtails, eyes exactly like Sophia's. 6 months ago, Lorenzo's voice came out rough, stripped of every trace of a mafia boss's authority. She was kidnapped right in front of the school gate. I turned the whole city inside out. I would have burned Boston to find her. 3 months ago, she escaped, but I couldn't find her. He stopped, dragging in a heavy breath. Because she doesn't trust anyone anymore, not even me. Audrey felt Sophia go still in her arms. She looked down and saw the child staring at the photograph, gray eyes wide. Then Sophia did something that made Audrey's heart feel as if it stopped. The girl timidly reached out, a small dirty finger trembling as it touched the man's face in the picture. Touched the smile, touched the eyes. Like she was trying to remember something that had been gone for a very long time. Lorenzo sank to his knees, slowly, carefully, as if he feared any sudden movement might make his daughter run. He knelt until his eyes were level with Sophia's, his voice catching as if he were swallowing back tears. "Sophia, my daughter, it's Dad. I've been looking for you. I'm sorry I didn't protect you." Sophia didn't rush into her father's arms. But this time, she didn't retreat either. She just stood there, held by Audrey, watching the man kneeling in front of her. And slowly, one drop at a time, tears began to slide down the dirty cheeks of the 7-year-old child. The first tears Audrey had seen Sophia cry in 3 months. The diner went silent as paper. Big Mike stood frozen in the corner. Mr. Jenkins forgot his fear, mouth hanging open at the scene in front of him. The bodyguard stood perfectly still, no one daring to move. And then Leo's shout tore the moment apart. "Boss!" The black car across the street. Someone's taking pictures. Sophia shrank as if she'd been shocked. She clung to Audrey so hard her nails scraped skin, her face gone pale, her whole body shaking violently. Sophia's gray eyes weren't a child's eyes anymore. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen hell, and had just realized hell was coming back for her. Lorenzo sprang upright like a leopard catching a sound in the brush. His eyes swept the window, cutting through the ashen sheet of rain, and fixed on a black sedan parked about 50 meters away across the street. Someone sat inside, a vague dark shape behind tinted glass, and the flash of a phone or camera flared in bursts, like signals from a disaster closing in. Lorenzo spun to his bodyguards and barked a short string of Italian, clipped and cold. 2 of them lunged for the door. But before they could even reach the middle of the street, the sedan revved. Tires screamed on the wet pavement, kicking up a spray of water before it vanished around the corner. Lorenzo cursed, then turned back, his face so tight the cords in his neck stood out. "We have to go. Right now. All of us." Audrey held Sophia close, feeling the child's small body shivering in her arms. Go where? Who was in that car? Lorenzo ground his teeth, his jaw hard as stone. Roman Castellano, or his people, the one who kidnapped my daughter. Audrey felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. Roman Castellano. She knew that name. Anyone who'd lived in South Boston long enough knew it. The most brutal drug kingpin on the East Coast, people said. They said he'd buried a family of 5 alive because the father dared testify against one of his men. They said he controlled half the cocaine flowing into Boston. They said a lot about Roman Castellano, and the worst part was that most of it was true. "Castellano and me," Lorenzo said fast, his voice urgent, as if he were counting down seconds. "We've been at war for 10 years. He wants the North Port to move drugs in from Mexico." I refused. "The Vitale family doesn't touch drugs. Never has, never will. Gambling, protection, money laundering, that's my limit." But Castellano won't accept that. He looked at Sophia, pain tearing through every line of his hardened face. 6 months ago, he took her, kept her as leverage to force me to hand over territory. He kept her alive because he needed a bargaining chip. But 3 months ago, Sophia escaped. And now, Lorenzo stopped, drew in a heavy breath. Now that he's lost his hostage, he wants her dead, because she's seen too much in those 6 months. Faces, names, locations, deals. My daughter isn't just a hostage anymore. She's a witness. Audrey looked down at Sophia. The girl had her face pressed into Audrey's chest, her hands clinging tight as if Audrey were the only lifeline in a storming sea. A 7-year-old who'd watched hell for 6 months, and now had to carry its secrets like a death sentence. Lorenzo met Audrey's eyes, his voice dropping lower. "If Castellano knows she's here, he'll come back. Not with 1 car, with an army. And he doesn't leave witnesses alive. You too. You've seen my face. You've seen the girl. To Castellano, you're a witness now." Audrey felt the floor tilt under her. 20 minutes ago, she'd just been a broke waitress trying to get through the day. Now she was standing in the middle of a war between 2 criminal empires, holding a child, her life hanging by a thread. Lorenzo offered the choice, his voice stripped of emotion. "You've got 2 paths. 1, forget everything you saw today. Pray Castellano doesn't know your face, and go on living your life. 2, come with us." Audrey looked down at Sophia. The girl lifted her head, gray eyes soaked with tears, looking at Audrey with all the trust a shattered child could give anyone. And in that moment, Audrey didn't see Sophia anymore. She saw Emily, her little sister. 8 years ago, the same wide eyes, the same total faith. Emily lay in a hospital bed, skin pale as paper, IV lines running into her from every direction. "I'm sorry," Audrey at 19 had whispered through tears. "I don't have the money. Just wait for me. I'll find the money. Wait for me." But Emily couldn't wait. 8 years old, leukemia, and a sister who didn't have enough to save her. Audrey had held her little sister in her arms when she took her last breath. She'd sworn she'd never let that happen again. Audrey lifted her head, and her eyes hardened into steel. "I'm coming." Lorenzo frowned. "You don't understand what you're getting into. This world has no place for naive kindness. You'll die." "I do understand," Audrey cut in, her voice steady. "I understand this is your world, where people kill for money and power. I understand I might die, but she trusts me." She tightened her hold on Sophia. "And I'm not leaving a child behind. Not ever. Again." Lorenzo watched Audrey for a long time. He didn't speak, but something in his gaze shifted. Maybe he saw what Audrey didn't even realize she was showing. The resolve of someone who's lost everything and has nothing left to fear. The recklessness of someone who once let the most precious thing slip away and swore she'd never make the same mistake again. Lorenzo gave one short, decisive nod. "Move." 5 minutes later, a line of black vehicles tore out of Sal's Diner's parking lot, slicing through the rain like bullets flying toward the unknown. Audrey sat in the back seat of an SUV. Sophia curled beside her, head resting on Audrey's shoulder, a tiny hand gripping Audrey's so tight her fingers went numb. The girl wasn't crying now, wasn't shaking. She was only holding on, as if the moment she let go, Audrey would fall into a bottomless pit. Through the car window, Audrey watched the city of Boston slide past in gray rain. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know what was waiting. She only knew that from this moment on, Her life had turned onto a road with no way back, and she'd just stepped into a world where the line between good and evil was thinner than anything she'd ever imagined. The convoy stopped in front of a massive steel gate in Beacon Hill, Boston's wealthiest neighborhood, where even the smallest apartment cost what Audrey would make in a lifetime of work. The gate slid open automatically, and the SUV rolled onto a white cobblestone drive that cut through an enormous garden. The Vitali mansion rose out of the rain like a fortress from the Italian Renaissance, 3 stories tall with marble columns, ornate wrought iron balconies, and towering windows that looked down over the city. Security cameras clung to every corner. Guards patrolled along the perimeter. 2 sleek black Dobermans stood watch at a side gate, their alert eyes tracking every car that passed. Audrey carried Sophia inside and felt like she'd stepped into a museum. Polished marble floors reflected the light of crystal chandeliers. Oil paintings hung on the walls, the kind of antiques that were probably worth a fortune. A spiraling oak staircase led to the upper floors. Everything was luxurious. Everything was expensive. Everything was perfect. But it was cold in a way that raised the hair on her arms. There was no laughter, no warmth, no sign of life beyond footsteps echoing on stone. This mansion felt like a tomb dressed up in finery. Lorenzo led them to the second floor and stopped in front of a white door covered with faded glow in the dark stars. Her room. He opened the door, his voice dropping. I kept everything the same. 6 months. Audrey stepped in and felt her heart squeeze shut. A 7-year-old girl's room, with a pink princess bed, a closet full of dolls, a drawing corner with dozens of boxes of crayons and sheets of paper, a bookshelf packed with fairy tales. All of it lay under a thin film of dust, the mark of 6 months without its owner. Sophia stood in the middle of the room, gray eyes sweeping each corner, as if she were trying to recognize a place that had once been home. She touched a blonde-haired doll on the shelf, then yanked her hand back as if she'd been burned. She looked at the drawings she'd once made, taped on the wall, bright, messy pictures from a happy child, and her face tightened with pain. Lorenzo stayed in the doorway, one hand braced on the frame as if it were the only thing holding him upright. He wanted to step inside, wanted to hold his daughter, wanted to say something, but he didn't dare. The fear in his eyes was so plain it hurt to see. The fear that any movement at all would send his daughter running again. Sophia went to the bookshelf and reached up to pull down a photo album bound in brown leather. She sat on the floor and turned the pages, slowly, as if she were searching for something. Then she stopped. On the page was a woman so young and beautiful it stole the breath. Long black hair, glossy and thick. Gray eyes just like Sophia's, but overflowing with life and joy. A smile gentle as spring sunlight. In the photo, the woman cradled a newborn wrapped in white cloth, her face glowing with happiness. Lorenzo spoke from the doorway, his voice rough, as if every word were a cut. Isabella, her mother. She died giving birth to Sophia, hemorrhaging. The doctor said he could only save one. She chose you. Audrey saw Sophia start to tremble. The child's small hand rose to the woman's face in the picture, her finger tracing the curve of a smile she'd never get to see in real life. And then Sophia cried. Not the small, broken sobs Audrey had seen at the diner. This was a wail, a strangled scream that tore at the heart, the sound of a child who'd held everything in for too long, who'd endured too much, finally bursting like a dam that couldn't hold back another drop. The crying filled the room, the hallway, the cold mansion itself, as if it were waking ghosts that had slept for 6 months. Lorenzo took a step forward, then stopped. His face twisted with pain. He didn't know what to do. The most powerful mafia boss in Boston, the man who could order a killing with a nod, stood helpless in front of his daughter's grief. Audrey lowered herself to the floor beside Sophia, gently, slowly, giving the girl time to pull away if she wanted to. But Sophia didn't pull away. She turned and threw herself into Audrey's arms, burying her face against Audrey's chest and crying as if the world were falling apart. Audrey held her tight, one hand stroking her hair, her mouth murmuring the meaningless things people say when they're trying to soothe a child. Over Sophia's shoulder, she saw Lorenzo still in the doorway, his steel-gray eyes rimmed red, his jaw clenched so hard she could almost hear his teeth grinding. He didn't cry, but the pain on his face was clearer than any tears. Sophia cried until she was spent, until the sobs thinned into the steady breathing of sleep. Audrey laid her gently on the bed, tucked the blanket around her, and stepped back into the hallway. Lorenzo was gone. Audrey found him on the second-floor balcony, staring out at the city of Boston, lights glittering in the night. A glass of whiskey sat in his hand, already more than half gone. He didn't turn when he heard Audrey's footsteps, but he didn't send her away either. Audrey stood beside him, silent for a long time, listening to the night wind and the distant wail of car horns. Finally she spoke. "Why don't you kill Castellano? You've got power. You've got men. You could end this in one night." Lorenzo took a sip of whiskey, eyes still fixed on the distance. A street war would drag on for years. Blood would spill, not just mine or his, but innocent people's too. The cops would get involved. The FBI would get involved. And Sofia would grow up with a father running for his life, or lying in a coffin. He turned to look at Audrey. "I'm collecting evidence to put him in prison. Cleaner, a way for my daughter to have a future." Audrey met his eyes. "You're still a criminal." Lorenzo didn't deny it. "That's right. I'm not a good man. I've done things you don't want to know about. But I've got rules. No drugs, no hurting kids, no touching an enemy's family. Castellano, he'd kill a rival's wife, a rival's child, even the dog and cat in the rival's house if he felt like it. He has no limits." Silence. The night wind moved across them, carrying the chill of a Boston autumn. Lorenzo suddenly asked, his voice lower. "Why risk your life for a child you don't even know? You could die. You still could." Audrey looked out toward the city's blinking lights. "I told you about my sister," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I couldn't save her then, because I was powerless. I won't let history repeat itself with Sofia." Lorenzo didn't say anything. He only nodded, a small nod, as if he understood, as if he knew what loss was, too. As if for the first time, they weren't looking at each other like a mafia boss and a broke waitress, but like two human beings who'd been knocked down by life and were trying to stand back up. They stood beside each other in silence, watching Boston's night. Not allies, not friends yet, but two people marked by loss, who'd found something shared. A resolve to protect a child at any cost, no matter what that cost might be. A week passed inside the Vitali mansion, and things began to change in ways that were small, and yet profound. Sofia still didn't speak, still communicated with nods and shakes of her head, but her smile showed itself more often. At first it was only the faintest lift at the corner of her mouth when Audrey told some silly joke. Then it became a real smile when she watched Audrey spill flour all over her own face while teaching her how to make pancakes. A child's laughter rang through the mansion's vast kitchen, and it was probably the most beautiful sound these walls had heard in 6 months. Lorenzo watched from a distance, standing behind the kitchen door like a ghost, his gray eyes never leaving his daughter for a single second. He wanted to step inside, wanted to join them, wanted to hear that laughter aimed at him, but he didn't dare. Every time he moved closer, Sofia shrank just a little, and Lorenzo backed away, the wound in his eyes deepening with each day. Audrey saw it. She began to serve as a bridge, whispering to Sofia that her dad missed her, that he stood out there because he was afraid of scaring her, that maybe she could give him a chance. Sofia listened, gave no reaction, but Audrey knew the girl was thinking. Sofia's drawings changed too. In the early days, she drew houses with bars on the windows, black figures standing in dark corners, gray clouds sealing off the sky. But little by little, color began to appear. Bright yellow sunflowers, brown sparrows perched on branches, a blue sky with soft white clouds. The drawings of a child slowly finding her way back to the light. On the 7th day, Sofia did something that left both Audrey and Lorenzo with their throats tight. She spent the whole morning drawing in her room and wouldn't let anyone come in to look. By afternoon, she stepped out shyly with a sheet of paper in her hands and went straight to where Lorenzo sat reading a newspaper in the living room. She stood there, head lowered, hands trembling as she held the drawing out toward her father. Lorenzo took it, and when he saw what it was, he went utterly still. In the picture, 3 people stood in front of a house. A tall man with black hair, a young woman in an apron, and a small child between them. All 3 were smiling. Above them, in a child's wobbly letters, Sofia had written a single word: family. Lorenzo held the drawing and stared at it without a word. Audrey saw his fingers tremble, saw his jaw clamp down as if he were trying to hold something back. Then Sofia did something neither Audrey nor Lorenzo expected. She took a hesitant step forward, and her small hand slowly settled on her father's large one. A light touch, careful, as if she were testing whether it was safe. Lorenzo closed his hand around his daughter's, gentle as if he were holding a butterfly, afraid any force at all would make her fly away. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. That moment was everything on its own. But darkness never lets the light last for long. That night, a knock sounded at Lorenzo's office door. Leo came in, his face so tense the creases in his forehead were deeper than usual. "Boss," he said, his voice dropping. "Castellano knows now. His men have confirmed the mansion's location. And—" Leo hesitated, as if he didn't want to keep going. "And what?" Lorenzo asked, his voice cold as ice. Leo handed Lorenzo his phone. A message from a hidden number. 10 minutes ago. Lorenzo looked at the screen, and Audrey, standing outside the door about to step in to ask about Sophia's schedule for tomorrow, saw his expression change. "Hand over the girl, or I'll kill both of your women. You've got 48 hours. Signed, R." See. Lorenzo ground his teeth, his gray eyes darkening like a sky before a storm. He didn't say a word, but the hand holding the phone clenched so hard the casing crackled. Audrey backed away, heart pounding. "Both of your women, Sophia and her. She was putting them in danger." That night, Audrey couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, thoughts spinning in circles. She was only a broke waitress from South Boston. She didn't belong in this world of guns and blood and messages that promised murder. If she stayed, she'd be a burden. She'd be a weakness. She'd be the reason Sophia was in danger. Near midnight, Audrey wrote a short letter, slipped it into her pocket, and lifted the small bag holding the few changes of clothes she'd brought from her old apartment. She went down the stairs, moving as softly as a cat, toward the front door. She'd just put her hand on the doorknob when a tiny hand grabbed the hem of her shirt from behind. Audrey turned. Sophia stood there, eyes red from crying, maybe from a nightmare. She looked at Audrey, looked at the bag, and the storm gray in her eyes filled with terror. Not Castellano's terror, the terror of being abandoned. Sophia pulled a napkin and a pen from her pajama pocket, the ones she always carried. She scribbled fast, so fast the letters slanted and shook, then held the napkin up in front of Audrey. "Don't go. Sophia needs you." Audrey went rigid. This was the first time Sophia had communicated with written words, the first time she'd reached out on her own to say, even without speaking, that she needed someone. "Where do you think you're going?" Lorenzo's voice came from the stairs. He stood there, still in his suit, as if he'd never gone to bed. Audrey looked up, her voice catching. "I don't want to put you in danger or—" Lorenzo came down, each heavy step ringing on the stone floor. "You've given my daughter something money can't buy. You gave her trust. You gave her a reason to laugh for the first time in 6 months." He stopped in front of Audrey, steel gray eyes locked on hers. "I'll protect you, with my life if I have to." Sophia wrote one more line, then held it up so both adults could read. "Family doesn't leave." Lorenzo looked at his daughter's crooked letters, then at Audrey, then back at the words. Something flickered in the Mafia boss's cold eyes. Something like resolve, like steel, like an oath that didn't need a voice. Castellano wants war. He'll get war. But my way. The next morning, Lorenzo called an emergency meeting in his office. Leo stood by the door with his arms folded across his chest, his face drawn tight as a string about to snap. Danny, the Vitali family's tech specialist, sat in front of a laptop, fingers tapping non-stop across the keyboard. Audrey was asked to come in, a rare thing in a Mafia world where women were usually pushed out of important meetings. Lorenzo stood before a whiteboard, his voice low and decisive. Castellano keeps all his criminal evidence on a hidden server in a warehouse at the North Port. Murder videos, drug transaction ledgers, a list of corrupt cops and politicians he's bought. If we get that data and make it public, Castellano gets life in prison. His empire collapses. No street war, no bloodshed. Danny looked up from the laptop screen and shook his head. The problem is the server is heavily protected. Multi-layer encryption, military-grade firewalls, and it needs a master password to access. Without the password, I'd need at least 6 hours to crack it. Too long. Castellano will detect it and destroy everything before we can download it. Silence settled over the room. Audrey looked around and saw the dead end written on every face. Then, suddenly, she spoke, surprising even herself with the boldness of it. "What if someone distracts Castellano, pulls him away from the warehouse while you break in?" Lorenzo turned to her, steel gray eyes narrowing. "You're saying you'll be bait?" Audrey nodded, trying to keep her voice steady even as her heart pounded. "Castellano wants me." He said it in the message. "Both of your women. If I show up, he won't be able to ignore it." Lorenzo shook his head, firm. "No, it's too dangerous. Castellano will kill you the second he realizes he's been tricked. I'm not allowing it." The meeting fell back into a stalemate. Danny kept hammering at the keys in hopeless frustration. Leo let out a slow breath. Lorenzo paced like a caged beast. Audrey bit her lip, trying to think of another solution, but her mind went blank. No one noticed the door had cracked open. No one noticed storm-gray eyes watching through the gap, listening to every word. Not until the door swung fully open and Sophia walked in. She went straight to the table without a shred of hesitation, holding the familiar napkin and pen. To everyone's stunned silence, Sophia scribbled and held the napkin up. Sophia knows the password. The whole room seemed to freeze. Lorenzo dropped to his knees in front of his daughter, his voice trembling. "What did you say? What do you know?" Sophia wrote again, slowly, each letter firm. VITALEDEAD2025. Danny lunged closer, eyes wide. "Wait. That's the password format Castellano's system uses. I saw traces of it when I tried to get in. If that's the real password." Lorenzo gripped his daughter's shoulders, fighting to contain his agitation. "Where did you get that, Sophia?" Sophia didn't write anymore. Instead, she pulled out a blank sheet and began to draw, fast, precise, as if the images were burned into her mind and now were pouring out through the tip of the pen. The first drawing showed a dark room with a computer on a desk. The second showed Castellano, rendered with lines so clear they were frightening, sitting at the computer, hands on the keyboard. The third showed the computer screen with a string of characters. The fourth showed eyes, Sophia's eyes, staring at the screen from the corner of the room. Danny looked at the drawings, then at Sophia, then at Lorenzo, his voice full of astonishment. "She has an eidetic memory, photographic memory. She remembers exactly what she sees. Every detail, every character." Lorenzo understood. During the 6 months of captivity, Castellano had gotten careless. He'd thought a 7-year-old couldn't understand anything, couldn't remember anything, just a silent hostage in the corner. He worked right in front of Sophia, made calls, typed passwords, planned with his men. And Sophia had watched, had listened, had remembered it all. Sophia wrote one more line, the letters crooked but clear. Sophia knows more. Names, faces, calls, locations. Lorenzo looked at his daughter with a completely new gaze. Not the gaze of a father looking at a small child who needed protection, but the gaze of a man realizing he was standing before something extraordinary. This child hadn't only survived. She'd turned 6 months of hell into a weapon. She'd watched and memorized everything like a perfect witness. A slow-burning bomb Castellano never knew he was raising. Danny was already typing like a madman. "Boss, if she gives me enough, I can breach the system remotely. No need to go to the port, no need to break in. I just need time, and what she remembers." Lorenzo nodded, voice iron. "Do it." But Sophia only gives information. She doesn't take part in anything dangerous. She doesn't leave the mansion. She doesn't meet anyone outside. Understand? Sophia looked at her father, and for the first time since she came home, she smiled. Not the shy, frightened smile of the early days. A smile with a hint of cunning in it. The light of a child who knew she held the power to get revenge on the man who'd kept her caged for 6 months. She wrote a final line and held it up for everyone to read. "Sophia wants Castellano in prison." Lorenzo knelt and took his daughter's tiny hands in his, the eyes of the Mafia boss shining with something that looked like tears. "He'll go to prison, my girl, I promise." 2 days passed in tension and waiting. Danny worked without stopping, his fingers pounding the keyboard until calluses formed, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. With the information Sophia provided, he'd breached Castellano's system remotely, slipping through layer after layer of firewall like a ghost in a digital world. But the bad news came on the afternoon of the second day. "The data's too large," Danny explained to Lorenzo, his voice exhausted but grave. "More than 2 terabytes of video and documents. Downloading remotely would take dozens of hours, and it'd definitely be detected. The only way is for someone to plug a USB directly into the main server." The final plan was drawn up. Audrey would play bait, showing up at the meeting point to pull Castellano's attention. While he was busy dealing with her, Lorenzo and his team would break into the warehouse, plug in the USB, and pull the entire archive. Simple in theory, deadly in reality. The night before the raid, the Vitali mansion sank into the tight silence of people waiting for the storm to hit. Sophia was asleep, Danny sitting in a chair beside her bed, guarding her while still working on the laptop. The guards patrolled more heavily than usual, The whole house felt like it was holding its breath. Audrey couldn't sleep. She lay twisting in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about tomorrow, about what could happen, about what she could lose. Finally, she got up, threw on a sweater, and went out to the balcony. Lorenzo was already there. He stood leaning on the railing, looking out over the city of Boston, lights glittering in the night. No whiskey this time, just him, and darkness, and silence. Audrey stood beside him without speaking. They stared out together, listening to the night wind and the city's distant hum below. The quiet stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet shared by two people who didn't need words to understand each other. Finally, Lorenzo spoke, his voice lower than usual. "You can still refuse. The plan is dangerous. No one is forcing you." Audrey looked at him. "I know. Then why?" Lorenzo turned to face her, eyes studying her in the dark. Audrey fell silent for a moment, searching for the right answer. "Because of Sophia," she said slowly. "Because..." She hesitated, then went on, her voice smaller. "For the first time in 8 years, I feel like I belong somewhere." Lorenzo didn't answer right away. He turned toward Audrey, and somehow the space between them had narrowed without either of them noticing when it happened. "If something happens tomorrow," he began, his voice rough, "I want you to know." Audrey put a hand over his mouth, stopping the words. "Don't talk like you're writing a will." Lorenzo let out a soft laugh, so small it was almost soundless. "I haven't trusted anyone since Isabella died. Not men, not women, not anyone except my daughter. But you're different." Audrey felt her heart pick up speed. "I'm just a broke waitress from South Boston. I've got nothing. No money, no power, nothing at all." Lorenzo lifted his hand and touched Audrey's cheek, and she realized she was crying without knowing when it had started. His fingers brushed away her tears, a tenderness that was almost impossible to believe could come from the hands of a Mafia boss. "You're the only person who's ever dared look me in the eye and tell me no." His voice dropped, nearly a whisper. "Do you know what that means to a man like me? The whole world kneels in front of me, and you stand straight." The distance between them vanished. Audrey could feel Lorenzo's breath on her mouth, could see pale silver threads in his gray eyes under the moonlight. They leaned toward each other, slow, as if time itself had stopped. Tiny footsteps sounded behind them. They both turned at once. Sophia stood in the balcony doorway, arms wrapped around an old stuffed bear, gray eyes wide as she looked at them. She wasn't scared. She didn't cry. She didn't run away. Instead, a small smile spread across her face, the mischievous smile of a 7-year-old catching adults doing something secret. Then Sophia ran over, took Lorenzo's hand with one small hand, took Audrey's with the other, and tugged them toward the sofa on the balcony. They sat down, Sophia between them, and the girl climbed up, curling like a kitten, head resting on Audrey's shoulder, feet draped across Lorenzo's thigh. Minutes later, she was asleep, her breathing steady and soft. Lorenzo looked at his daughter, then looked at Audrey over the child's head. In the dark, he slowly reached out and took Audrey's hand where it rested on Sophia's shoulder. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. They sat there, the three of them, on the last night before the storm. A brief peace. In only a few hours, everything would change. 2 o'clock in the morning, the line of black vehicles slid through Boston's empty streets like ghosts in the night. Audrey sat in a separate car with Leo, her heart pounding in her chest, both hands clenched together to hold back the shaking. Through her earpiece, she could hear Danny back at the mansion, his voice steady and focused. "Comms are good. All units report in." Before she got into the car, Sophia had run to hug her. The girl didn't cry, but her storm-gray eyes were full of worry. Sophia pressed a small folded napkin into Audrey's hand, then turned and ran back inside before Audrey could say a thing. Audrey opened the napkin in the car. Under the flickering streetlights, she read the crooked words, "You have to come back." She folded the napkin again and slipped it into her pocket, close to her heart. "I promise," she whispered, even though Sophia couldn't hear her. Boston Harbor at night was a completely different world. Shipping containers were stacked like enormous steel buildings, forming a dark, frightening maze. Pale yellow light from scattered lampposts wasn't enough to chase away the darkness, only enough to create patches of light and shadow like a haunted chessboard. The smell of sea salt, mixed with oil and rusted metal. Fog clung to the water, spreading slowly like ghostly fingers trying to crawl onto shore. Leo's car stopped at the agreed meeting point, an open space between 2 rows of containers. Audrey stepped out and felt the cold sea wind cut into her skin. She stood there alone, like bait dropped among wolves. They came out of the dark. 20, maybe more than 20 men dressed in black, guns in their hands, closing around her from every direction. And at the center of them was a man who stepped forward, slow, confident, as if the whole world belonged to him. Roman Castellano. Audrey recognized him at once, even though she'd never met him. 45 years old, short gray hair, cut neat, a long scar running from the corner of his eye down his left cheek, like the mark of some old battle. But the most terrifying thing was his eyes. Venomous snake eyes, cold, calculating, without a trace of humanity. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than Audrey made in a year, and on his hand a diamond ring glittered under the lights. Castellano stopped in front of Audrey and looked her up and down with undisguised contempt. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, his voice rough and dull, like gravel grinding together. "Why does that brat trust you more than her own father?" Audrey swallowed hard and tried to keep her voice steady even as her heart slammed like it wanted to burst. "Maybe because I didn't lock her in a basement for 6 months. Castellano laughed. A laugh so cold the air seemed to freeze around it. "That little girl saw too much. She has to disappear. And anyone who hid her." He tipped his head, studying Audrey like an insect about to be crushed. "Disappears too." At the same time, a few hundred meters away, Lorenzo and 2 bodyguards slipped between the containers toward the warehouse. They moved like shadows, silent, every step measured with care. The warehouse back door was opened with an electronic lock Danny had hacked remotely. Inside, Lorenzo found the server room in the basement, exactly where Sophia's information said it would be. The small room was packed with servers, green lights blinking, cooling fans buzzing in a steady hum. Danny's voice guided them through the earpiece. "The main server is in the right corner. The blue USB port. Plug it in and wait." Lorenzo did. The USB slid into place, and on Danny's remotely connected laptop screen, the progress bar appeared. 10%, 25%, 40%. Danny's voice came through, satisfied. "It's transferring. Hold position." About 3 minutes. Lorenzo stood there, eyes locked on the screen, counting every second. 50%, 60%. Then hell dropped in. Red lights flashed like madness. An alarm screamed, ripping the silence apart. Lorenzo cursed, his hand reaching for his gun. "What the hell is that, Danny?" Danny shouted into the radio, his voice panicked. "There's a secondary intrusion detection system. It's not on the network map. I didn't see it coming." Outside in the container yard, Castellano's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face shifted from contempt to fury in a heartbeat. "You tricked me?" Castellano roared, yanking a gun from inside his suit and pressing it straight to Audrey's temple. The barrel was ice cold against her skin, and Audrey felt her whole world shrink down to that single sensation of cold metal. "Vital!" Castellano bellowed, his voice echoing between the containers like thunder. "I know you're in there. Come out in 30 seconds or this bitch dies." In the server room, Lorenzo heard it all through his earpiece. The alarm. Castellano's roaring, the click of a gun being cocked, and Audrey's quick, tight breathing. He looked at the screen. 67%. Not done. Not enough. But out there, Audrey had a gun at her temple. 78%. 85%. The progress bar on the laptop screen crept forward so slowly it felt like it was torturing Lorenzo 1 second at a time. Through his earpiece, he heard Castellano counting down. 20 seconds. 15. 10. Then Audrey's voice, shaking, but still trying to stay calm, still trying to stretch the time. Lorenzo stared at the screen. 87%. Not done. But out there, in the dark, a gun was aimed at the head of the woman who'd risked her life for his daughter. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He yanked the USB out of the server, shoved it into his suit pocket, and ran. He came out through the warehouse back door, hands raised high over his head, stepping into the bright wash of headlights Castellano's men had trained on him. "Ha!" Castellano let out a rough laugh, lowering the gun from Audrey's head but keeping her in his sights. "Lorenzo Vitali in person. Haven't seen you in years. You've gotten old, Lorenzo. Power wearing you down?" Lorenzo didn't answer the taunt. "Let her go," he said, his voice flat, while his eyes swept the container yard, reading the situation fast. More than 20 gunmen. Leo stood a few yards away, hands bound, face bruised from a beating. Audrey stood rigid, a gun from one of Castellano's men still pointed at her back. "You want this? I'll give it to you." Lorenzo pulled the USB from his pocket and held it up so Castellano could see it. Castellano narrowed his eyes, then nodded. Throw it. Lorenzo tossed the USB through the air. One of the men snatched it and handed it to Castellano. Castellano plugged it into a laptop someone had already set up and checked the contents. A few stretched seconds passed. Then Castellano looked up, the smile on his mouth like a snake's venom. Good, very good. Real data. Not complete, but enough for me to know what you were really trying to do. He snapped the laptop shut, shoved it into a man's hands, then turned back to Lorenzo, those poisonous eyes gleaming with pleasure. You think I'm gonna let her go? Let you go? Castellano shook his head, like he was disappointed in a naive child. Lorenzo, you should have known me better than that. He nodded at a gunman close by. The shot cracked through the night. Leo went down, clutching his right shoulder, blood spilling through his fingers. His groan of pain echoed between the containers. Audrey screamed and tried to run to him, but two men grabbed her tight. Lorenzo went rigid, jaw clenched so hard you could almost hear his teeth grind. You think I'm stupid? Castellano stepped closer to Lorenzo, his voice like cloth tearing. You know too much. The kid knows too much. And this bitch, he pointed at Audrey, knows too much too. He stopped right in front of Lorenzo, snake eyes locked on steel gray. Nobody walks out of here alive. Castellano turned his back and flicked a hand in bored dismissal. Kill them all, then go find the little brat. I want to see her body before sunrise. More than 15 gunmen spread into an arc, weapons aimed at the three of them. Lorenzo, Audrey, and Leo on the ground, groaning. No way out. No hope. Audrey looked at Lorenzo from a few yards away, and strangely, she didn't feel fear. She only felt regret. Regret that there hadn't been more time. Regret that Sophia was about to lose one more person. Regret that their story ended here, among rusted containers and the smell of sea salt. Lorenzo spoke, his voice low and heavy with guilt. I'm sorry. I never should have let you get pulled into this. Audrey smiled, a smile oddly gentle in this moment. I chose it. Castellano stood a short distance away, shaking his head with disgust. How touching. Now shoot. The sound of guns being cocked rose all at once. Audrey closed her eyes, and then darkness slammed down. Not the darkness of death. Real darkness. The entire power system across the harbor went down at the same time. Lights died. Headlights died. Street lamps died. The whole port dropped into a pitch-black ink of night. Chaos erupted. Shouts, running feet, gunfire cracking wild in the dark as panicked men fired into the air. Someone yanked Audrey down to the ground, a large body shielding her. She recognized the familiar scent of cologne. Lorenzo. They lay flat to the pavement, hearing bullets whip overhead, hearing Castellano screaming orders no one could follow. In the darkness, Lorenzo's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, the screen's glow faint as a candle in black night. A video message from the mansion's number. Lorenzo's heart seemed to stop. He opened it, and the world went still. On the screen was Sophia's face. She sat in her room in front of the laptop, wearing headphones too big for her small head, and she was smiling. Not the frightened or worried smile. A sly smile, the smile of a child who knew a secret adults didn't. Sophia lifted her hand and waved in the video, then turned the camera toward the laptop screen behind her. A line of text blinked there, green on black. Uploading. 100%. Complete. Lorenzo stared at the phone screen, not believing his own eyes. 100%. Complete. The green letters blinking back at him felt like a miracle he couldn't explain. Danny appeared in the video frame, the IT specialist's face full of shock and confusion. Boss. Danny's voice trembled through the phone speaker. The kid. She did this while I wasn't looking. I don't understand how. Sophia held up a blank sheet of paper, wrote fast in her familiar crooked handwriting, then raised it to the camera. Sophia knew Dad would pull the USB early. She flipped to the next page. Sophia asked Danny to teach hacking. The next page. Danny didn't know Sophia learned that fast. And the next. Sophia breached the server before you got to the port. The data is all uploaded to the cloud. Danny confirmed over the radio, his voice still stunned. Boss, she's telling the truth. I just checked. The entire 2 terabytes are backed up. Videos, documents, lists, ledgers, everything. She used what I taught her and wrote her own intrusion code. I don't even know when she did it. Sophia kept writing, the letters quick and decisive, as if she'd been ready for this for a long time. Sophia sent it to the FBI, CNN, the Boston Globe, everyone. Lorenzo's voice caught, eyes locked on the phone screen even as gunfire and chaos still raged around them. "You, when did you do this?" Sophia looked straight into the camera, storm gray eyes no longer afraid, but full of resolve. She wrote one more line, slowly, one word at a time, as if she wanted to make sure her father understood, since I knew Dad would risk his life for Audrey. Sophia won't let anyone die. Audrey lay beside Lorenzo in the darkness, watching the phone screen over his shoulder, and tears began to fall. "She saved us," Audrey whispered, her voice breaking. "A 7-year-old saved all of us." Sirens cut through the night, distant at first, then drawing closer and closer. Helicopter spotlights swept the harbor like giant torches, lighting up every dark corner, every container, every panicked face among Castellano's men. FBI, police, they were coming in. Castellano screamed in the dark, his voice no longer cold, but raw with fury and fear. "Find the power source. Find Vitale. Kill them all." But it was too late. His men scattered like ants hit with boiling water. No one listened anymore. Everyone only wanted to get out. Lorenzo hauled Audrey to her feet, one arm around her, the other dragging Leo, who was snarling through the pain. They ran between containers in the darkness, bullets snapping around them, helicopters roaring overhead. Leo, bleeding from the shoulder, still forced himself toward the vehicle, teeth clenched through every step. They piled into the SUV just as the FBI convoy surged into the port gates from the opposite side. Leo hit the gas, and the SUV shot out of the harbor like a black bullet tearing through the night. Inside the car, Audrey saw Lorenzo laughing. A strange laugh, proud and stunned, half wanting to cry and half wanting to shout with joy. The laugh of a father who'd just realized how extraordinary his daughter truly was. 7 years old, Lorenzo said, sounding like he was talking to himself. "My 7-year-old just brought down an empire neither Mafia could take down in 10 years. Audrey looked at him, and a smile rose on her mouth even as her tears still hadn't dried. "She didn't just survive," Audrey said. "She fought in her own way from the beginning to the end. We thought we were protecting her, but it turns out she was protecting us." Lorenzo turned to Audrey, his eyes softening. "You okay?" Audrey nodded. "Alive. You?" Then she looked down and saw blood. Blood spreading through Lorenzo's shirt along his left side, dark in the shadows. "Blood!" she shouted. "You've been shot!" Lorenzo looked down as if he was only noticing now. "I'm fine," he said, calm in a way that was almost frightening. "Just a graze. Just get me back to her." The convoy reached the mansion as the first light of dawn began to lift over Boston's horizon. The gate opened, and Audrey saw a small figure standing on the front steps. Sophia. The girl ran out, not waiting for the car to fully stop, charging straight toward Lorenzo and Audrey as they climbed out. She wrapped both of them in a single hug, small arms trying to circle 2 grown bodies at once, face pressed into their chests, her whole body trembling, not with fear, but with relief. Sophia pulled back, took Lorenzo's hand, and wrote on his palm with her small finger. Each word, slow, clear. "Dad promised Castellano would go to prison. Sophia kept my promise to help Dad." At the same time at the port, hell came down on Roman Castellano. The headlights of dozens of FBI vehicles turned the place bright as day, ripping apart the pitch-black night. Helicopters thundered overhead, spotlights sweeping across every container and every blind corner, leaving no darkness untouched, no shadow to hide in. SWAT poured in from every direction. Rifles raised, shouted commands echoing through loudspeakers. Castellano ran. He ran like a rat driven into a dead end, skirting along the containers, hunting for a way out. But the port gates were sealed. Every exit had FBI already waiting. He was surrounded with no escape, standing in the middle of a ring of gun barrels, his snake eyes now flooded with panic. One of his men staggered up, face drained white, hands shaking as he held out a phone. "Boss," he said, voice on the verge of tears. "The news. It's everywhere." Castellano snatched the phone, and his world collapsed right in front of him. A red banner flashed across the screen with a headline that shook the city. "Every dark secret of the Castellano empire has been exposed." From the leaked murder videos to the list of officials on his payroll, the truth was now broadcasting live for the world to see. Castellano stood frozen, watching the criminal kingdom he'd spent 30 years building crumble in a matter of seconds. And there was more. Fox News, NBC, ABC. Every channel was broadcasting the same thing. The videos he'd thought were locked away and safe were now playing on national television. His face, his voice, Every crime he believed he'd buried forever laid out in front of millions of eyes. Castellano stared at the screen, his face as pale as a corpse, his snake eyes wide with horror. He'd built his empire for 30 years. He'd killed and stolen and bribed and threatened to get it all. And now, in a single night, everything was falling apart. Because of a 7-year-old child. The FBI agent stepped forward, his gaze cold and professional. "Roman Castellano," he said in a flat, powerful tone, "you are under arrest. The irrefutable evidence recovered from your server has just signed the warrant for your downfall." The sound of ice-cold cuffs snapping shut marked the definitive end of his reign. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." Castellano exploded, roaring like a wounded animal. "Vitali, I'll kill you. I'll kill your kid. I'll find you even if I've got to go down into hell." The agent looked at him with the indifferent calm of someone watching an insect thrash. "With 47 murder videos playing on national television," he replied coldly. "You'll never see daylight again, Castellano." Ice-cold cuffs snapped shut around Castellano's wrists, and he was shoved into the vehicle like a chained dog. His empire collapsed, his life ended, and it had all begun with a silent child sitting in the corner of a poor diner in South Boston. The next morning, at the Vitali mansion, Lorenzo lay on the sofa in the living room, the wound along his ribs carefully bandaged. The bullet had only grazed him. It hadn't hit any organs, and the family's private doctor had come and handled it in the night. Sophia sat on the floor beside the sofa, legs folded under her, bent over her drawings. The picture showed 3 people smiling, standing in front of a house with a garden of flowers, and in one corner she'd added a figure sitting inside a cage, the face twisted with rage. Everyone knew who it was. The television in the living room ran the news around the clock. Castellano was denied bail, the judge declaring him a danger to the community. 15 high-ranking police officers were arrested in the largest corruption case in Boston's history. Victims and families spoke out, thanking an anonymous source for exposing the crimes. Audrey sat in a chair beside Lorenzo, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold long ago, eyes on the television but not truly watching. "You won," she said softly. Lorenzo shook his head, eyes on Sophia, drawing on the floor. "It wasn't me. The kid won." Sophia looked up, hearing her father talk about her. She grabbed the napkin and pen she always kept on her, wrote a few words fast, then held it up for both adults to read. "We won. Family." Lorenzo looked at the crooked letters and a rare smile touched his mouth. But the smile died when he glanced back at the television. A banner scrolled along the bottom in glaring red. "FBI confirms the leaked data also contains evidence of Vitali family activities. An investigation is underway." Lorenzo's face darkened. In the war to bring down Castellano, he'd forgotten one thing. Castellano's server hadn't held only his crimes. It had held the deals, the battles, the secrets of a 10-year Mafia war. And inside it, there was Lorenzo's guilt too. 3 days passed in a tight, grinding kind of waiting. The news of Castellano flooded every television channel, every newspaper front page, every conversation on the streets of Boston. He was formally charged with 47 counts of murder, international drug trafficking, money laundering, and bribery of federal officials. Life in prison without parole. Roman Castellano's empire had collapsed completely, and he would die behind bars. But Lorenzo knew that wasn't the end. The calls from lawyers came more and more often. The messages from sources inside the FBI grew more alarming by the day. The data from Castellano's server didn't only hold his crimes. It held deals, battles, secrets from a 10-year Mafia war. And inside it, there was Lorenzo's guilt too. It was only a matter of time before the FBI came knocking. On the 3rd night, Lorenzo called Audrey and Sophia into his office. The room had bookshelves that climbed to the ceiling, a massive oak desk, and warm yellow light that should have felt comforting. On the desk, a stack of legal documents had already been prepared, the lawyers' seals and signatures still fresh. Sophia sat in a leather chair far too large for her small body, feet not touching the floor, swinging in the air. Audrey stood beside her, one hand resting on the girl's shoulder, feeling worry rise like a tide in her chest. Lorenzo stood at the window, looking out over Boston at night, his back to them. The silence stretched until it felt like it could choke. Then he turned, and Audrey saw something she'd never seen in those eyes: letting go, acceptance, and the deep pain of a father preparing to say goodbye. "I have to go," Lorenzo said, his voice low and lightly trembling. "And maybe, for a long time." Sophia looked at her father, storm-gray eyes not understanding. She pulled her napkin and pen from her pocket, wrote quickly, and held it up. Where? Where are you going? Lorenzo stepped forward and knelt in front of his daughter, taking her tiny hands in his large ones. I've done a lot wrong, my girl, he said, each word sounding like it was being torn out of his heart. Before you, I didn't care. I thought money and power were everything. I did things I'm not proud of. But now I've got you, and you need a future without guns, without running, without fear. Sophia shook her head hard, tears spilling and sliding down her cheeks. She scribbled, the letters trembling with feeling. Dad did nothing wrong. Dad saved me. Dad can't go. Lorenzo smiled, the saddest smile Audrey had ever seen. I love you, more than anything in this world, but the best way to protect you, the best way to give you a normal life, is for me to turn myself in, cooperate with the FBI, get a reduced sentence, and you'll be able to go to school, have friends, have a future, without always looking over your shoulder to see who's watching. Sophia didn't write again. She did something neither Lorenzo nor Audrey expected. She threw herself into her father's arms, clinging with all the strength a 7-year-old had, face buried in his chest, shoulders shaking in waves. For the first time since the kidnapping, since the 6 months of hell, Sophia hugged Lorenzo first, and Lorenzo hugged her back, the powerful arms of Boston's most feared Mafia boss trembling as he held the small body of his 7-year-old daughter. Then he cried, not the quiet, hidden kind of crying men try to bury. This was a broken, choking sob, the sound of all the years of loneliness, the pain of losing his wife, the 6 months of searching for his daughter in despair. Love so large he was willing to surrender his freedom so his child could be happy. Audrey stood there with tears streaming down her face, not even trying to wipe them away. She watched father and daughter holding each other, and her heart felt like it was being crushed. Lorenzo lifted his head and looked at her over Sophia's shoulder, steel gray eyes now red-rimmed and wet. Take care of her, he said, voice raw. I trust you, only you. Audrey nodded, unable to find words, only able to whisper, I promise. Lorenzo signed the guardianship papers, granting Audrey legal custody of Sophia. The handwriting shook, but it was clear. He hugged his daughter one last time and whispered in her ear, I'll come back. Wait for me. The next morning, Lorenzo called the FBI. He turned himself in, cooperated fully, offered every piece of information in exchange for a lighter sentence. A police car arrived at the mansion at 8 a.m, pale autumn sunlight filtering through the trees. 2 agents cuffed Lorenzo right at the front door. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He only stood there with the calm of a man who'd accepted his fate. Before he stepped into the car, Lorenzo turned back for one last look. Audrey and Sophia stood on the front steps, hands clasped tight. Sophia didn't cry anymore. She lifted her hand and waved, a small gesture that carried the weight of everything. In her storm-gray eyes, there was no fear now, no confusion, only love and the promise of waiting. Lorenzo smiled, the first smile that was completely peaceful since Isabella died. He gave a small nod, like a vow without words, then turned and got into the car without looking back again. The door shut. The engine started. The police car rolled away, carrying Lorenzo Vitali out of the lives of the 2 women standing on the steps. Audrey pulled Sophia into her arms, and they watched the car until it disappeared at the end of the drive. Sophia pulled back and wrote on Audrey's palm with her small finger. Will you wait for Dad? Audrey knelt, looked into the girl's storm-gray eyes, and nodded. Yes, she said, voice breaking but steady. We'll both wait. She lifted Sophia into her arms, walked back inside the mansion, and closed the door behind them. Outside, the autumn sunlight stayed pale gold through the trees. The first chapter ended, but their story hadn't. 2 months passed like a dream. The headlines of the trial of the century slowly began to fade, replaced by a new era of peace. Based on the overwhelming evidence, Roman Castellano was sentenced to life in prison, destined to waste away behind bars without ever seeing the sun again. His empire was gone, and the city finally breathed a sigh of relief. Lorenzo Vitali received a sentence of 5 years in federal prison, far lighter than what he truly deserved, thanks to full cooperation with the FBI. The evidence he provided, and the fact that he'd never touched drugs and had never directly carried out a killing. The Castellano empire collapsed completely, like a sandcastle pulled apart by the tide. The Vitali empire was dismantled in a controlled way. Legitimate assets transferred, illegal operations declared and ended. A dark chapter in Boston's underworld closed. Audrey went back to Sal's diner, but not as the broke waitress working double shifts just to cover rent. Sal, after an expensive and exhausting divorce, sold off his share of the place. Audrey used the money Lorenzo left behind to buy in, becoming a co-owner. The diner was renovated, a new neon sign replacing the old one that had flickered on its last breath. The walls repainted a warm cream, the tables and booths replaced with clean new ones. But booth number 4 stayed exactly as it was, with its worn blue vinyl seat and a newly changed light bulb. The place where it all began. Sophia lived with Audrey in a small apartment near the diner, not the glittering mansion on Beacon Hill, but it was clean and warm and safe. She went to a public school, living like a normal child for the first time in her life. She had friends, a teacher who cared. Afternoons spent drawing in a small room full of sunlight. Her drawings no longer held darkness, no bars, no frightening figures, only flowers, birds, blue sky, and 3 people standing close together, smiling. One autumn afternoon, Audrey waited at the school gate like she did every day. The dismissal bell rang and the children poured out like birds released from a cage. Audrey scanned for Sophia, and she saw the girl running toward her. Sophia was nothing like the thin, terrified child curled up in booth number 4 long ago. Her cheeks were rosy. Her eyes were bright. Her blonde hair was neatly tied into 2 small braids. She ran up, and Audrey was ready to gather her into her arms like always. But today something was different. Sophia stopped a few steps away, drew in a deep breath, and opened her mouth. "Mom." One word, just one, hoarse and shaking from being unused for so long, but clear. So clear Audrey felt the whole world stop around her. "Mom." Audrey stood frozen, heart seeming to stop. She couldn't believe what she'd heard. For months, Sophia had only communicated through writing, through drawings, through gestures. Doctors said she could speak. There was nothing physically wrong, but trauma had locked her voice away. She needed time. She needed to feel safe. And now, standing in the sunlit schoolyard, Sophia had spoken. Sophia threw herself into Audrey's arms, holding tight, and spoke again, each word slow, like she was learning how to use her voice all over. "Mom. I missed Mom," Audrey cried. She cried right there in the schoolyard, in front of dozens of other parents, and she didn't care. She held Sophia close, kissed the girl's hair, and whispered, "Mom missed you too. Mom loves you. So much." Every Sunday, Audrey and Sophia drove to the federal prison to visit Lorenzo. Through the separating glass, Lorenzo watched his daughter change week by week, healthier, happier, and now, she could speak. Sophia told her father about school, about her teacher, about new friends, about the pictures she drew, about the blueberry pancakes Audrey made every morning. Lorenzo listened, eyes lighting up with every story, the smile on his mouth no longer painful, but full of pride and love. At the end of every visit, the 3 of them placed their hands on the glass, Lorenzo on one side, Audrey and Sophia on the other. Lorenzo's large 5 fingers, Audrey's slender 5 fingers, and Sophia's tiny 5 fingers, touching through cold glass that still couldn't keep them apart. "Thank you," Lorenzo said, voice low and sincere. "For everything." Audrey smiled through tears. 5 years. Then we'll be a real family." Lorenzo nodded, eyes holding Audrey with all the love he'd kept hidden for so long. "I'll wait, however long it takes." Before they left, Sophia handed the guard a sheet of paper to pass to Lorenzo. A new drawing. In it was a small house, not a mansion, just an ordinary home with a flower garden out front. 3 people stood in front of it, hand in hand, all of them smiling. Beneath the picture, in the crooked handwriting of a 7-year-old, Sophia had written, "Our home, 5 more years." Spring came and went. Summer burned, then yielded to a fall gone golden and tired. Winter laid down a white sheet of snow over Boston's streets, then melted into little streams that ran back to the sea. Year after year, time moved like water that never stops, carrying old pain away and bringing new joy in its place. Audrey finished her nursing degree after 3 years of studying and working at the same time, but she kept Sal's diner, the place that had saved her, the place that had given her a family, the place where a plate of blueberry pancakes changed everything. Sophia grew a little more every day, from a thin, silent, frightened 7-year-old into a confident, radiant 12-year-old. She could speak now. She could laugh now. And each day was a new day filled with light. Every Sunday, never missing once, Audrey and Sophia drove to the federal prison to visit Lorenzo. 1,825 days. They counted every single one, and then that day came too. Tuesday morning, Boston spring. Sunlight like honey spilling through the windows of the small diner on Dorchester Avenue. The place had been renamed Sophia's Pancake House, famous across the city for its blueberry pancakes and the story behind them. The little sparrow drawing on the napkin from long ago had been framed with care, hanging on the wall right beside booth number 4. Beneath it were the words, "The place where it all began." Audrey was 32 now, pouring coffee behind the counter, hair pinned up neatly, her smile coming easier than it used to. 5 years had smoothed the worry lines from her forehead, replacing them with the beauty of a woman who'd finally found peace. Sophia was 12, doing homework in the kitchen, darting out now and then to help carry plates, grinning wide at the regulars. 8 in the morning, the door chime rang. Audrey didn't turn, hands still busy with coffee, voice calling out, "Welcome to Sophia's. Sit anywhere you like." Sophia ran out of the kitchen to greet the customer like she always did, but she stopped dead in the doorway. Audrey noticed the strange silence, followed Sophia's gaze, and her heart seemed to stop. Lorenzo stood in the entrance, 41, silver now at the temples, thinner than he'd been 5 years earlier. But those steel-gray eyes were brighter than ever. He wore a simple white shirt and jeans, no longer the powerful black suit of the Mafia boss he once was. But he was still handsome. Still Lorenzo. The silence stretched for 3 seconds, but it felt like 3 years, like a whole lifetime. Then Sophia shattered it. "Dad," she screamed, her voice bursting with happiness, and ran for Lorenzo like a bullet. Lorenzo dropped to his knees and caught his daughter in his arms, holding her tight as if he was afraid that if he let go, she'd vanish. Father and daughter clung to each other in the middle of the diner, Sophia crying and laughing at once, tears soaking the front of Lorenzo's white shirt. "I'm home," Lorenzo whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. It's been so long. You've grown so much." 5 years, Dad," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "I counted every day. 1,825 days." Lorenzo stood, one arm still around Sophia, and he looked toward Audrey behind the counter, still holding the coffee pot, tears running down her cheeks. Lorenzo walked to her, each step slow, like he was crossing 5 years of distance in a few short seconds. "I'm back," he said, voice low and warm. Audrey set the coffee pot down, ran out from behind the counter, and fell into Lorenzo's arms. And their first kiss, the kiss that had been interrupted on the balcony 5 years ago, was finally finished. 5 years of waiting melted into a single moment. Sophia stood beside them, grinning, eyes shining. "I knew you two liked each other forever. Big Mike even bet me $50 Dad would kiss Mom the second he got back." Big Mike stuck his head out from the kitchen door, face bright red. "Hey, don't expose me like that!" The whole diner laughed, the sound bouncing around the small, warm space. Lorenzo slid into booth number 4, the booth where 5 years earlier a thin, terrified 7-year-old had curled up in the shadows. Sophia sat beside her father. Audrey sat across from them. She brought out a plate of blueberry pancakes, exactly like the plate from the first day. Lorenzo looked at the pancakes, looked at his daughter, looked at Audrey. He said one word, "Family." Sophia took her father's hand. "Family." Audrey took both of their hands, happy tears rolling down her cheeks. "Family." At last, Boston's spring sunlight poured through the glass, filling booth number 4, where 3 people from 3 different worlds had found one another. On the wall, the sparrow drawing on the napkin had yellowed with time, but the words beneath it were still clear. The place where a plate of pancakes changed everything, and that's the story of how one small act of kindness, one free plate of blueberry pancakes, brought down a criminal empire and built a family out of broken pieces. Audrey didn't have money. She didn't have power. She didn't have weapons. She only had the courage of a woman who'd lost everything, protecting a child who'd lost everything too. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change the whole world. This story leaves us with deep lessons about life. That kindness is never meaningless, even if it's only a small act like feeding a hungry child breakfast. That family isn't always the people who share your blood, but the people willing to sacrifice for you. That the past doesn't define the future, and everyone deserves a second chance. That love has the power to cross every barrier, every distance, every trial.